Tappei has just released Arc 7 Chapter 29, and this video will be a summary of the chapter. I highly recommend you check out my Arc 7 Chapter 28 summary beforehand. Anyways, let's get into the video. The chapter begins with the proclamation that the Divine Generals being coerced to the side of Abel would be the victory condition to reclaim the throne. Subaru mulls over the fact that hearing the names of the Divine Generals didn't really elicit any sort of emotion of excitement, which is something he thought he would have felt. Subaru also ponders over their secondary names. So Arakia is known as a spirit eater, which is about how she can eat spirits and use their powers. In other words, the Divine General's secondary names could relate to their skills and abilities. However, Subaru can only really imagine the abilities of the Spellcaster and Flying Dragon General, since those names tend to require tools. The Flying Dragon General, for example, would use a flying dragon for battle. Abel goes on to explain that there is an odd amount of Divine Generals. In other words, it's a battle of attrition, and obtaining 5 Divine Generals would be good for victory. But Chisha Gold and Arakia were enemies, so they were at a disadvantage. Subaru wonders if they'll be able to get 5 Divine Generals on their side and doubt it can happen. However, Al interjects and states that Abel had already become an emperor. So in other words, Abel could invite these Divine Generals and they wouldn't decline an invitation. In other words, it would depend on what happens after they meet. Subaru continues talking to Al. Subaru discusses the idea of the 9 Divine Generals, something he doesn't really understand. They all report to the Emperor and are all located in the Imperial capital, so how did they get across the country when they're needed? However, Priscilla and Dicker Ottoman add information talking about how there could be civil uprisings, and therefore the Divine Generals are sent off to different regions of the Empire, and therefore they can be scattered around. In other words, some Divine Generals were not present at the Imperial capital, and Subaru further asks about the possibility that not all Divine Generals are an enemy. Some may be loyal to Abel. This is something that Abel agrees with. With that in mind, the possibility of getting Divine Generals on their side was increasing. Subaru further asks about the numbers, stating that higher numbers means they're stronger. In other words, Subaru and the group should prioritize higher ranking Divine Generals. To this, Abel also agrees. The attention goes to Cecilus, who is stated to be on par with Reinhard. Subaru knows that Reinhard could fight the whole kingdom of Lagunica and win, so he wondered how strong Cecilus was. In other words, Cecilus was the key for victory. Abel agreed, but there was something off about him, and Subaru asked why he looked bitter. The reason for this is because the 9 Divine Generals will most likely follow the footsteps of other Divine Generals. So by gaining some support, it actually snowballs into something bigger. Subaru is confused. After all, if they manage to recruit Cecilus, he's the strongest in the kingdom, and the victory would be theirs. However, Abel states that Cecilus is very unpopular. The only thing Cecilus can do is kill people. Apart from that, he is useless. Subaru lashed out, stating that someone like Cecilus shouldn't be a Divine General. However, Al jumps in and he states that this is the way of the Empire, as he puts his arm around Subaru to calm him down. As the conversation continues, Abel asks Dicker for an assessment on Cecilus. Dicker explains that Cecilus is a cornerstone for Valachia's defenses. He's very pleasant as a person and he's very friendly. However, the other Divine Generals believe Cecilus is a monster who is unable to communicate on a deeper level. Abel jabs at Subaru's attempt to get Cecilus on their side, but Subaru states that it's no wonder he was ousted if he wasn't popular and the top ranked general also wasn't popular. Subaru was reminded to not be disrespectful as Priscilla and Abel looked at him, but Subaru just stuck his tongue out. In other words, Cecilus was a problem. He was unpopular, so trying to recruit him was not really worth it. But on the other hand, he could change the tide of war, so having him would be great for battle. Subaru thinks about Reinhard and wonders if he shouted out aloud, would Reinhard be able to hear him and would come running to save him. Abel seemingly read Subaru's mind and stated that people like Reinhard cannot cross the border. Priscilla calls Subaru a fool and asks him if he has any more questions for Abel to answer. However, before Subaru could respond, they were interrupted by Flop entering the building. We see that he was helping the wounded people after Arakia's attack. Subaru was of course blaming himself as 7 people died overall, and Flop told him no one else died of their wounds. Flop praised the other people like Rem and his sister who helped out with everyone. Subaru was of course sad that people died, but at the same time he was happy that no one else died. Abel inquires on how Rem is doing, of course due to the fact that she's a healer. Priscilla inquires to whether or not Flop works for Abel, but Flop explains he's cooperating with Subaru. However, you could call Flop and Abel friends. Priscilla looked at Abel upon hearing this, stating that she didn't know Abel was making friends without her knowledge, and stating it's no wonder the throne was much easier to vacate. However, Abel states he isn't friends with Flop. Flop, however, states that they've battled through death together, and on top of that, they've also wore women's clothing together. However, Abel stated that with that logic, every one of his soldiers would be his friends since they go through death together when they battle. Abel asks why Flop appeared, and Flop stated he needs Kuna and Holly to come with him. Furthermore, Subaru and Abel also go. The scene changes and we see the crew and they are upstairs where the wounded are. We can see that Flop led them to where Mizelda was. After all, she was the person most hurt when Arakia attacked the city hall. Mizelda thanks Rem for being alive. After all, if Rem didn't heal her, she would have died. She then praised Subaru's contribution for taking over the city of Guaral. With that, Mizelda states that she can no longer be the Shadrakian chief, and that Tarita will be leading the Shadrakians. With that, Mizelda pats one of her knees, and we see that she also is missing a leg. With that, the chapter ends. This was quite possibly the shortest chapter Tappei has released. It was only 9,000 characters long, so it was very short. Honestly, nothing much really happened. We just see that Mizelda has given the lead of the Shadrakians to Tarita, and we now know that we need 5 divine generals to claim victory. And honestly, that was pretty much it. Nothing really happened, if I'm going to be honest with you. I think the chapter is called How We Stand, which is what Deep L suggested, which is kind of funny because Mizelda is now missing one of her legs below the knee. I'm not sure if that's like a pun by Tappei or something, I'm not sure. By the way, sorry for the editing in this video, I have to do something later on, so I just put random images in, so apologies for that, but thank you for watching.